as soon as she pushes the button, she's got a button to push. All right. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Would you please stand with me and recite the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. To start off our meeting tonight, it appears that we are going to have an annual report by our acting police chief, Les Watson. So welcome to the meeting, Les, and you can stand up there. There's a microphone.
Thank you, Your Honor. And good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Looking to see if we have our PowerPoint up soon. Sure. I think it's, in the meantime, I'm here tonight to present the Shelton Police Department's annual report. And I tone this down to just a handful of slides here so I don't take a lot of your time, but try to get the message across. Do you want to click that, or do I have a clicker? Okay, this is the cover of it. I believe you've been given a copy of this report, perhaps? Not yet? Okay. You'll each be provided a copy, and for those of you in the audience, if you're interested, this will be presented online as well at the city's website. If you want to go ahead and hit the next slide, please. Hey, I want to first off let you know that this might be difficult for you to read up here, but I'll go over some of these items, and we're not going to go detail line by line, just kind of get the general gist of it. And you'll have the opportunity to review these at length at your leisure when you have your report in front of you. But this first slide is a breakdown of the neighborhoods in the city to include Angleside, Beverly Heights. It goes down the list to the Mankey Addition, etc. And what this does is it captures the activity and calls generated from those individual neighborhoods over the past 3 years. And that way you can see the trend or lack thereof on the number of calls from neighborhood to neighborhood. And what we find is that these calls in volume are fairly consistent from year to year, and this is the same message I delivered last year, and it bears out again this year. If you can see, for example, the downtown total is in 2011 was a little over 3,800 calls. In 2012 it was 3,829, and in 2013 it was 3,796. So unusually stable in terms of numbers from neighborhoods, and you'll see that pretty much across the board there. The only one that has really any significant number of, in terms of change or percentages down towards the bottom where it says Shelton, Mason County, and those are calls where somebody will come in the lobby and they don't know exactly where their wallet was stolen or their purse was taken out of their car, etc. So we categorize it as Shelton, Mason County instead of in the neighborhood. We have no ability to have any impact or control over that number, but it went up from 411 to 471. It's probably the most significant change you'll see on that particular slide or page of your handbook. You get it? Go ahead, please. Now I know this one's going to be difficult for you to see, and I apologize for that. But again, when you take a look at your handbook, what this slide captures is the individual crimes and the numbers that break down over the years, actually the past 2 years, 2012 and 2013. And the top item that you probably can't see from there is murder, and it shows 2 reported in 2012. And actually that was a single incident that happened up on Harvard Street, and there was 2 victims in that. And then in 2013, there was also 2 homicides or murder victims. And one of those happened at a house up by Five Corners, if you might recall. It was a shooting. And then the other happened down at First and Railroad, and that was an incident where 2 young people engaged in a physical altercation. One of them perished as a result of that. So interestingly, the 2 incidents in 2012 happened in 2013 happened in August. So last year when I spoke to you, those things hadn't even occurred at this point in time. So we're crossing our fingers and hoping that those numbers remain at zero this year, and so far they are. The 2012 incident was on May 28th of 2012. So it gives you kind of an idea when these things are occurring. You can't predict it, but we're certainly not at the end of the year, so we don't know what those numbers will be. One of the things that I pointed out last year with respect to this particular slide, or one similar to it, is the number of sex crimes that we had reported in 2012, because that was the period I was reporting on last year. And there was a spike in 2012, and I explained that to be just that, some unusual aberration, and that we expected those numbers would go down in 2013 without any intervention on our part. And that, in fact, has occurred. The number of forcible rapes, for example, was in 2012 was 12, and in 2013 that number was 4. So gives you an idea of just what the differences are between those 2 years. Another one that you'll see on here is down towards, I think, the center somewhere. It's motor vehicle thefts. And those shifted from 2012 from 72 to 86. Now, interestingly, I think that's the only thing that we've seen peak from 2012 to 2013. The rest of our crime index actually went down. And at the bottom, you'll see a number. It says in the yellow strip in the middle. Clear at the bottom, the grand total says minus 17.2. And that's the percentage that our crime actually went down from 2012 to 2013. So that's good news. And my final note on this one is this is probably the most telling page in this report that you'll get, so I would encourage you to pay particular attention to that. Thank you, Tracy. On this slide, the first line says calls for service, and this is categorized over 2011, 2012, 2013, and they all hover right at around 10,000 calls, and that seems to be fairly stable now for the last few years. Although there is some trend in that number dipping, it's not significantly decreasing, but it is lowering. And when you think about it, I think it was, I want to say 2008, but I couldn't swear that for certainty. Our numbers were up in the as high as 14,000. So we've had a reduction in calls, roughly about 4,000. For some reason, they trended up, and we stabilized at 12,000 for a number of years, and they peaked up to 14,000, and now they've dropped down to about 10,000. They've stabilized at that page, at that level. So you can, again, at your leisure, take a look at this page of your report, but that's probably the most important thing on that particular slide that I'd like to point out. Go ahead. Drug enforcement is something that we've actually focused on quite a bit. We have some officers in patrol who are very proactive in this particular arena. We have a new person assigned at WestNet who also, while he was in patrol, was very active in eradicating drugs in our community. I think that our numbers, I'm just going to take a big wild guess here, but I think that next year when somebody's reporting this, you'll also see an increased number of arrests. That'd just be my prediction at this point. But what I can tell you is that from 2012 to 2013, we had an increase of heroin arrests just in the city from 21 to 35 arrests. We had an increase in methamphetamine arrests from 34 to 40. And also, you might find fairly obvious, we had a decrease in marijuana arrests. In the adult section, this is broke down between juveniles and adults, but it went in the adults from 57 to 1. You can probably guess what that was for. In case you haven't, it's I-502, and so it's no longer an issue that we're going to be enforcing when it comes to adults. Next slide, please. This is the last slide. I promised you this would be relatively short tonight. And I saved this one. I made sure that it got in there because I wanted to say that, that more than anything, we in the police department, and the city for that matter, are in the people business. And it's important for us to interact with our community. It's also important for us to recognize our people when they do good work. These are our employees of the year. Officer Paul Campbell's been with us since, I believe, 1999, about the time we moved into this building. He served in detectives, and now he's back in patrol doing a fantastic job. Officer Greg Blaylock, he put in, I can't tell you how many hours as a reserve police officer here, and really benefited our patrol division. Because we were saddled with a lot of calls. He worked himself up to a level 3 patrol reserve, which meant that he could go out and handle calls on his own. Well, he did such a fine job on that he got hired out from under us by the Squaxin Police Department. So now he's a full-time Squaxin police officer, and they're going to send him to the academy. So he's done a fantastic job, and we appreciate that. And the one there that's last is Diana Hupp. I'm sure you all know her. Diana's been with us a number of years, clear back into the old building, and her position started as a part-time position where she was doing data entry for our dispatch center for our mapping program, and then it just evolved from there to a full-time position where she's serving as the confidential administrative assistant to the chief. That's a lot of words. We should shorten that, but at any rate, she does a fine job and serves a very important function in our department. That concludes this presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay. What do you attribute the decrease in crime to? Do you have any ideas?
I think there's a couple of things, Commissioner. One is that there just seems to be a trend in a reduction in crime across the country and the state. It may have been certainly not 17.2%, but they seem to be tapering off in terms of numbers. The other thing is that, as I pointed out, we have some officers who do a fantastic job out in patrol making drug arrests. And it's my theory that, maybe you've heard me say this before in different forums, that there's a pyramid of crime underneath any drug kingpin that we might have. So that if this is the pyramid and at the top of it is somebody who, for example, we arrested up a Harvard Street that was involved in that homicide that we had in 2012. If you take somebody like that off the streets who's dealing in drugs and dealing in stolen property, all related to drug activity, then you can have an impact on the overall crime statistics. And I think that contributes largely to that number being reduced at this point.
That's great news. Do we still have an officer who is coordinating a block watch or a neighborhood watch?
We do. That's one of the functions that when we lost our crime prevention position, we had to meld that into what our school resource officer was doing. So he's put a web page up, or he's an email stream, and several contacts in the community for them to seek information and receive information about what's going on in the neighborhood.
Great. So that's something that if someone was concerned about crime in their particular neighborhood, they could form a block watch.
Absolutely, right. We've actually gone and contacted some people to do recruitments, so to speak. And then if anybody is interested in their neighborhood, they can certainly get a hold of me or Officer Denning, and we can make that happen available to them.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'd like to think that you guys are responsible for the decrease in crime, because I think you guys do a great job. And you kept mentioning Harvard Street, which I'm hoping we can fade that from memory, as I have a house I rehabbed right across the street from that house, so it's not good advertisement at this point. My question is, you know, in the recent national news and local state news of the incidents in schools with weapons and people arming themselves, and I thought I read that the state was giving out some money to school districts to implement plans. Have you guys been involved in anything like that with the Shelton School District as far as a potential armed intruder?
Well, they certainly haven't shared with us any of that money.
They haven't. Maybe I heard that was coming or something.
But we have been involved with them quite heavily over the years in developing school response plans. And as a matter of fact, not long ago, there was some training done by the regional Mason County SWAT team. And we have 2 members that are actively involved in that team, where, in fact, Officer Denning helped facilitate this, where they would actually practice at the various schools in the school district, so that should something happen, they already have some familiarity with it. So, yeah, we're very heavily engaged with the schools on that line.
Good, I think that's great to get that out to the public, to reassure as much as we can that we're ready for a response if necessary, and God forbid we don't have any reason, but that's great you guys are proactive like that. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Les Watson, and you're our acting police chief, and we appreciate you doing the job, and of course, all of the staff with our police department. So, thank you very much for your report.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Wes.
All right, next is our weekly commission report. Commissioner Moore. Sorry.
Well, I can't think of anything funny to say to that. This week, I have a Mason Matters meeting on Thursday. As you know, we were at a conference all last week for Association of Washington Cities that classes, I guess we would call them classes, that I took mainly focused on communication and futurist planning, which is where trends are examined and innovative communities will plan for the future so that they will be more relevant to the people that will move there, more relevant to the up-and-coming businesses that we're hoping to attract. And it was very, very interesting. I learned really a lot. I was really happy to go to those courses. I'm anxious to hear about the courses that my fellow commissioners took. I also, as part of the conference, Shelton received a Well City Award, and even though this commissioner had nothing to do with it, I think it was mostly staff. And so I would really like to thank the staff, and Vicki, I think you may be one of the primes. I know Leslie's involved as well. But thank you very much for being proactive with that and saving us 2% on our insurance. It's awesome, and I promise I will be more involved next year. So thank you and congratulations.
Commissioner Olson.
And to follow up on that a little bit, we get some street signs they're going to provide for us to put in various parts coming into the city to recognize us as a wellness city. You got them already? Yeah, they're big, yeah.
They're cool.
Yeah. Well, I guess they can go anywhere. You can put them on your desk if you want, I don't care. My schedule this week is tomorrow I'm meeting with Lynn Longan of the EDC. Wednesday I have a Mason Transit meeting. Thursday I have a mental health and substance abuse policy meeting. And then I'll remind everybody of the downtown car show on Sunday, benefiting the Historical Society. And then the last thing I want to do is a little comment about about a week ago I participated in the State of the Community 2, they called it. It involved Mason General Hospital, the PUD, and Mason Transit. And as I'm sitting there going through this and listening to it, it dawned on me that, you know, the city is sort of the center of the universe here, you know, in Mason County. And you forget that there's these other entities out there that are really important to the citizens and to the future. And I just wanted to touch a little bit on how they connect with the city and driving, you know, our economy here and benefiting a better quality of life. Mason General Hospital, as you know, created a huge expansion in the last couple of years. And they are now recognized statewide for the facilities they have, the staff they've attracted, and the equipment that is possible now that in the past you always had to go to Olympia or Tacoma, you know, to have any kind of a specialty test done or anything. So I wanted to recognize those guys with that, and also along with that I did an internship with our building official while that was under construction. And I got to participate in some of the inspections and meet with some of the contractors and the hospital staff, and they were very pleased in working with the city. They had nothing but good reviews to say about how, you know, things came about in the staff development with planning and the public works. And also the fact that what they're doing is important for any city to thrive. You have to have health care, and especially as we know the trend is for an aging population. So I just wanted to, connect with Mason General Hospital and let everybody know that, we have a fine facility there, and it's only going to get better. The next part is the PUD. Everybody, of course, takes them for granted. That's our electricity. And, there were some interesting facts that Joel Meyer shared with us. We have some of the lowest rates in the nation here, and some of the cleanest energy coming from hydropower. He had a statement that Mason County, 95% of our power is generated from clean, renewable resource, which is hydro. Portland, on the other hand, where everybody thinks it's a very green city, 45% comes from clean. The rest of it comes from coal-fired plants. So that was kind of a real wake-up that, we have this facility in our midst, and that they strive to do the best they can for our residents. And another important part about this was that when they built their new building out there, which was a loss to downtown, they did something very environmentally proactive, and that was they took city water out there. Because of the Johns Prairie Aquifer was, I'm not sure if there's a moratorium on hookups or whatever right now, but regardless, they made a decision for the future, and not only for themselves, but potential economic growth in the area. By extending that water line out there and partnering with the city, it was a huge deal. And they were very pleased with working again with the city. Very good reports back from that. And the other part about them moving out of downtown, they've been very accommodating for Northwest Resources, who purchased the engineering building for them back there. They probably wouldn't have been able to purchase that going through conventional financing. The PUD was very accommodating, and now we will have a nice rehab center that is much needed in this community. I'm on the mental health and substance abuse policy or workshop, and it's very obvious. We need this kind of help in the city for rehabbing people with substance abuse. The last part about and then along with that, as I transitioned into Mason Transit, they were the first ones to hook up to the Johns Prairie line, receiving city water, and they also were able to fire up their sprinkler system, which was a federal and state requirement that we were dodging there real carefully. So, and of course I don't have to talk much about the community center that we're getting downtown here. If everybody drives by Safeway, you see an enormous steel structure going up. That is going to be a real game changer, I believe. For one, it's the first one like it in the nation. We're getting recognized nationally for the first time that an entity as Transit is coordinating things with the city that'll provide not only a community space, but there'll be some retail and commercial and office space there. So I'm real excited to be involved with that it's going to bring, jobs to downtown and a healthier community. And the reason I'm saying all this is connecting it up for the future, that we recently had to make a decision on our water system here. And it wasn't a unanimous decision. And as I look at these connections here, that everybody's striving to do things for the betterment of our community. And I was really disappointed that some special interest groups couldn't see the future enough to support us on this decision with the water rates that we're going to have to increase in order to provide infrastructure that will enhance economic growth in the future. And so I just thought it was kind of interesting, and I really appreciated the community effort that's going on amongst other entities besides just the city of Shelton, that we have partners out there with important entities, hospitals, transit, in our PUD that play a large role in that. So I just wanted to pass that along.
There you go. And my report here is to touch bases on what we did over in Spokane. On Tuesday, city administrator and I met with AWC, Association of Washington City's lobbyist team, and talked to them about our forming a coalition of other like-minded cities in addressing the sewer rate funding issue that is kind of hard on small cities, especially throughout the state of Washington. On Wednesday, I attended the Mayor's Exchange, a city a session called Clean Water Faster, and then later in the afternoon, Rethinking Sustainable Infrastructure. Then on Thursday, I attended an MRSC session, and it talked about legal questions, things like the Open Meetings Act and things like that. And also later in the evening, we met with some vendors who supply products and services to cities. And then on Friday, I was honored to be asked as a speaker and representative of the city of Shelton concerning the Poverty Task Force that we had put together. And we had a lot of cities very anxious to look into how we were dealing with that question, and also on the transformation from the first task force into what I believe is a human services organization, an ongoing committee. And so it was enjoyable, and it was a good opportunity to share what lessons we learned in forming our poverty task force. And it seems to be quite an interesting subject, especially across the state in maybe some of the smaller cities, but Spokane was there, and so that was a pretty big city. So anyway, and then later on that, on Friday, we were the host to a roundtable discussion, and that's where we were meeting with other like-minded cities about trying to find another funding source for the sewers and the regulations that are being required of small cities across Washington State. And as in our city, our story is known that we have spent millions and millions of dollars and aren't complete yet. And so if I could say there's one thing that as a mayor of a small city that is probably my number one chore, and that's to attempt to find funding sources and ways that this city can meet the requirements from the federal and the state without bankrupting our city and without continuing to raise the rates on our population and our ratepayers. And so it's the way you do it is you form coalitions and you find like-minded cities that want to come together and present legislation, and that's something that we are looking to do here in 2015. So working on trying to finish our last basin project and without continually raising the rates to an extreme degree. And so we had a very good turnout. The city administrator, Dave O'Leary, and I chaired that together. We gathered information, and we are looking forward to continuing to bring back favorable reports about the subject as we move forward. Last but not least is this week, I will be going to the Tri-Cities area on my own expense Thursday and Friday of this week to meet with the State Building Industry Association and talk to their legislation policy committee about endorsing legislation, if we do present that in 2015, concerning some other funding sources that might help small cities like us pay these millions and millions of dollars back. So I have gotten a verbal okay from them that this sounded like something, especially the rural communities, would be interested in endorsing. And it's my attempt at continuing to reach out to other groups that are experiencing the similar situations we are, so that we might be able to afford to pay for all this wonderful stuff. That completes our commission reports, and now we move on to the next 3 pages of our meeting, so I hope you're in for the fun and excitement we're about to bring you. So, next is a general public comment period, and if anyone would like to speak, it looks like somebody has, then when you get up to the microphone, if you could please state your name and address for the record. So Marilyn, would you like to speak now or concerning a special, something we're talking?
Concerning agenda item F1.
All right. Then what we'll do is we'll move forward, and if my fellow commissioners had time to review their consent agendas, and if they are ready for the reading of that consent agenda, could we please have that, Leslie Ann?
Consent agenda. Commission meeting minutes of business meeting of June 2nd, 2014, study session of June 9th, 2014, and business meeting of June 16th, 2014. Wastewater treatment plant phase 2 and Front Street improvements. Award contract to Prospect Construction and authorize the mayor to wastewater treatment plant equipment purchase, trailer mounted vacuum excavation system award to J.F. Solberg Company Incorporated. Portable trailer mounted 6-inch pump award to Dewatering Solutions. Authorize the Public Works Director to issue purchase award. Equipment purchase, paint stripe machine, award to Alpine Products, Inc.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move we approve the consent agenda.
I second that.
There's an motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The consent agenda passes. Item number F, under old business, is a briefing that's going to be presented to us by our Community Economic Development Director, Steve Goins.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I have 3 items I'm briefing tonight, and in each of these cases, they're laid out in a similar format. We've had public hearings and briefings on a set of code changes, amendments that will continue through the balance of the year and probably into 2015. These are largely addressing statutory requirements and changes in policy, hearings, decisions, maybe Superior Court or Supreme Court decisions on various activities that are related to land use. In this particular one, we made some recommended changes to our codes, delegating authority to the hearing examiner related to plan unit development applications and a series of amendments to those regulations themselves. I have spoken to the Commission a couple times on these, and there has been, in this particular case, a number of questions raised about the reasoning behind some of these changes and what the thought process was. Included in the briefing packet was 2 versions of the ordinance. One was the ordinance as a clean document, if you will. The second was an ordinance that included a number of comment boxes on the right-hand column. Those were intended to provide the Commission with some details on all the specific changes that were made and what the reasoning was for those changes. So I wanted to give that to you in advance, so I put it in that format so you could see some of the thought that was behind those individual changes. In terms of our process, I thought I'd spend a little time talking about how this relates to the environmental review under SEPA, which is the State Environmental Policy Act. And that process is a separate action that evaluates the environmental impacts of a particular project, or in some cases a non-project action. Maybe it's a planned document of some kind. For the PUD application, I thought a good example of this would be the Shelton Hills process that we've recently been through. That is a PUD application. And in that case, it was a very large project, very complex project, and there was significant environmental considerations. The determination was made that we needed to have an environmental impact statement to evaluate those impacts, and now we're on the other side of that SEPA process. They have not yet received their plan unit development permit. That process is now moving forward, but the environmental review and consideration of that has been completed. There might be other types of planned unit development applications that come in that aren't nearly as large and aren't nearly as complex, and the environmental review will likely be less. There might be a determination of non-significance with mitigation. There might be an exemption from SEPA. An example of that would be a very small project. I think Commissioner Moore mentioned a project as small as 1 acre could plan under a planning development application. If someone proposed 2 or 3 duplexes on a 1 acre site, the SEPA requirements that are in place now exempt that from further review. That is, the land use designations for that use have already been established. You can mitigate any impacts through fees and other types of things that are already in place. There's really nothing to add in terms of environmental review. And in many cases now, SEPA is trying to streamline that further by ensuring that there's not a overabundance of process for certain types of applications like that where there doesn't seem to really be a link to an impact of some kind. What I'm trying to convey and what these regulations I hope are conveying is those processes are linked and they're tied together. The SEPA requirements are unchanged, but the process that we're trying to establish for a PUD is being streamlined through this deletion of the second action, and we're trying to better clarify some of the other particulars, such as the hearings examiner's role, the city commissioner's role, and in this case we clarified the process when a PUD is considering land uses that may not particularly align with the underlying zoning. If a PUD like the Hall Equities PUD comes in and there are land uses that don't necessarily match up precisely with the zoning map, the hearing examiner makes a recommendation to the city commission. That a recommendation on those particular land uses has to come before the commission for a final action. If a PUD application is consistent with the underlying land uses, the hearing examiner decision would be a final decision unless appealed. And so that's in a nutshell the types of comments that we were receiving and largely the types of things I was hoping to respond to. In terms of some commission questions, I think Commissioner Olson asked about the parking requirements for new development and how this affects historic districts. The parking requirements are unchanged except if a PUD applicant wants to consider a modification to the parking standards, what they have to do is justify why that's a better solution. And the circumstance that comes to mind is they might want to take some creative ways to deal with stormwater, to deal with the paving, or they have maybe an idea that they want to provide a charging station for electric vehicles, which our code doesn't address. Something that's a little unusual that will make the project better. Those are the kind of things we want to entertain. We want to encourage that creative design. In terms of the historic districts, there's a separate process that each of those districts has created whenever there's not only new construction, but even a modification to an existing structure that requires a certificate of appropriateness, which is issued by the board. That process, again, is unchanged. And I'll speak to that more, I guess, on the site plan review process, but that, I guess, comes into play a little tighter. But those particular requirements aren't changed through a PUD process. They're still in place, and an applicant would have to adhere to those or demonstrate how they have a superior design in mind. Commissioner Moore asked about some of the assurances that a PUD wouldn't affect the neighboring properties. And the new language as well as the old language did speak to ensuring that those uses and the activities that are occurring aren't in conflict with their neighbors, whether that's through screening, a buffer, or changing driveways so that traffic is turned in a different direction. All those kind of considerations are what an applicant needs to demonstrate provides a better project in the end. It encourages open space, it encourages trails, other kind of amenities that aren't required, but would make it a better project, and that's really the underlying goal of the PUD application. As with the other two, our recommendation is to consider this for a second reading tonight.
Okay. First, I think, Marilyn, you had some comments, so why don't you come up and express your concerns first.
Thank you. Marilyn Vogler, 420 East Poplar. I spoke to you earlier about this, and I've since spoken with Steve and gotten some of the answers resolved. But I have a couple of questions and then a concern. I'd like to know what the immediate impact of these changes will be on plans for Shelton Hills, because during that project, we were promised there would be a second chance to bring this before the public and hear more about what was going to be developed and how it would be included. And I'd just like that to be clarified. I had asked Steve whether there had been any changes made based on earlier public input to this, and then I found the bubbles on the side of the Microsoft Word document. And I wanted to say I was really glad that the language providing that the city can request additional materials and reports and such had been returned, because I think it's really important that you be able to ask what you need. And so if there are any other additions, I think it's important that we know what kind of changes are made in response to input from commissioners and the public. I remain concerned about Section 2032-150B, which has to do with the approval process. And I'm concerned because it specifically limits very dramatically the input that the City Commission has. It's not that I don't trust hearing examiners, but they're not beholden to the people of the city. This section specifically places the final authority for decisions on planned unit development in the hearing examiner's hands. In the case that one is brought to the commission, it specifically limits your authority to dealing with zoning questions. It seems to me that for all kinds of reasons, that kind of authority, especially when you think of something as grand in scale as Shelton Hills, which would fall under this, that the final authority for approving that has to rest with a body that is accountable to the people who elect them, rather than with a hearing examiner. And so I know you probably don't want to hold this up any further. I'm not asking you to do that for this, but I do hope you'll consider very soon amending this particular section to return final responsibility for approving these to the City Commission where I think it belongs. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. I think I could possibly address that question a little bit, and I'm sure that Steve could. Is, to the best of my knowledge, the reason you have a hearings examiner is after the staff and the commission has all of our rules in place, and that's, you get it out of, excuse me, I got cut off, so I can't go on. Now, Steve, just in my experience, the reason you have this hearings examiner because they're the ones that have a depth knowledge of zoning and rules and ordinances, things like that, and I think that is kind of your final step. So how, is that how it's been, or?
The hearing examiner acts as a judge in these types of activities, and I was going to read off the current code that we have allows the hearing examiner authority for variance requests, conditional and special use permits, shoreline development permits, administrative zoning appeals, appeals of administrative decisions regarding subdivisions and preliminary plat approvals, and there's a number of others. These are the types of activities where you're asking someone that's impartial to evaluate your codes and make a decision based on what the codes say. Example of where this process might work really well is if you're considering the land uses that are being proposed in a PUD, it's pretty clear whether that's an allowed land use or not, and you're not giving a commission or a hearing examiner the power to deviate from that. What this process does do, however, it allows the applicant to ask the question, can I massage those boundaries to make this an improved project with commissioner's blessing? And in that case, we're moving that particular decision to the commission and not leaving that for the hearing examiner to decide.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I had, first of all, Steve, I really like the comment things you did, those little bubbles. Those were super.
A lot better than me saying it as we go by here.
Well, yeah, because you get a chance to read it 2 or 3 times and
Right.
really absorb it and refer back to what you're referring to. So I really appreciate those. I had a big flag also on what Marilyn brought up was the that same issue that in certain situations I think that the public needs more involvement and needs to be heard, and I do worry that the hearings examiner isn't going to take into account public sentiment or neighborhood makeup, things like that, where they're making a decision strictly based on a code book that sometimes, it's not as clear cut as that. So I would like to see something along the lines as Marilyn spoke to, that I think it's important to have public process as much as possible, but I too don't feel that it's a deal breaker as far as moving this along, but just enable just so that we can still have the ability as a community to, on some of these projects where they could be a little iffy or whatever, that we have the input on it. And then I had another comment on the 20.32.160. It's been completely wiped out as far as no timelines. You know, if they get their approval, it's been wiped out completely, that they have no timeline to submit a final development plan of the proposed PUD. Are we in danger of approving something and then having laws change, situations change, where then we can't revoke it or can't go back? And
Are you referring to 20.32.160?
yes, final review and approval application, time limitation.
That is described in the section 20.32.220, where it refers to expiration of your application. And I can provide some detail on that if you'd like, but in summary, the term for the PUD approval matches up with the term for a preliminary plat, which we think is a very good idea, because you have the subdivision portion, if you will, locked down for 7 years, and the PUD would match up to that. There is terms for extending that. In this case of the language you see here, we added language that would allow a developer's agreement to make changes to that. Of course, that requires commission action to accept a developer's agreement. We fully anticipate that the Shelton Hills development, which is anticipated to be a 20-year development, is going to want more than a 7-year term on their PUD application. Otherwise, we felt if you're giving the same assurance to your PUD application in sum as you are to your subdivision application, which is a significant investment by the developer, there's a great deal of value in that certainty to them.
That makes sense now that I hear it that way. And then the other part is the hearings examiner only is ruling on land use. The city and your staff, the economic development, you still have control over the ordinances and the codes that they have to still meet within their PUD.
The PUD allows them to contemplate variations to setbacks, for instance, or different elements of the code, with the understanding that the net result is a benefit to the community. It's a benefit in terms of quality design, and that's up to the applicant to demonstrate how that works. And again, some of the things that are written into this are promoting open space, promoting trails and other amenities to make this an improved project. There aren't requirements. Right. They're just part of a larger package that makes it a better project. And that evaluation, I suppose, could be somewhat subjective, but I think what you could compare it to is a project that doesn't have any of those added features, and which one would you prefer to have?
Okay. Yeah, I think overall this is a great step that will enhance development, because we're running out of the easy ones to develop, and you know, it is going to get more challenging for builders and developers. So I think this is a good process you've got going here. So
I think our city administrator had a point of...
Yeah, regarding the when and when to not use the hearings examiner, that's a fair question, and but before you act on that, I would hope that you would engage the city attorney, because there's a risk management issue associated with doing that the right or the wrong way. And so, anyway, what it is, it's applying the law, and I think in this case there may be some gray area, so it's probably a good idea to have that discussion. I don't see anything wrong with coming back and revisiting it later on, as long as you make sure we got the law right before we change it again. So.
I would like to second or third the appreciation for the explanations on the side, and the references to the other ordinances that are covered. It makes it much easier to read this. And I am excited. I go around and look at funny little pieces of land with, you know, a hill or something, and think, oh, that'll be great. We could have a project going there. So I'm excited to get this in place and have maybe some investors come and build something creative and great for our community.
Yeah, I think that no changes or documents are perfect, but everything that we do is in accordance to the standards and the recommendations, obviously, from the insurance community and legal and whatnot. And so I'm in favor of moving forward with a second reading at this time. So is that what my fellow commissioners concur? So,
Unless, should we review that a little bit more as far as what Marilyn and I just brought up, as far as a little more public involvement? Is that something we need to tweak, or should we revisit that?
Let me just, I guess, provide an example of how the public process would work in a PUD application, and you can decide how you feel about that. As I described with the Hall Equities Shelton Hills development, a large expansive proposal like that has a large expansive environmental review that's part of the SEPA process, which is really, again, a separate element. You've seen how that process works in that case. There may be a smaller project where all that happens is there is a notice given to agencies, adjoining property owners, that we're making a decision on a threshold determination, we're mitigating potential impacts, and we're making a determination of non-significance. You have a certain amount of days to comment. That might be another smaller project's approach on the SEPA solution. In terms of the PUD application itself, there is a hearing before the hearing examiner. In the case of Shelton Hills, there will be a subsequent meeting before the City Commission to contemplate land uses that aren't meshed up with the underlying zoning. So in terms of Shelton Hills, there'll be 2 more public hearings before the PUD application is approved. That may not be the case for a smaller project. In fact, like I said, a real small project may be exempt from SEPA, and the public meeting may be limited to simply a hearing examiner decision. The other side of that coin, I suppose, is we're always looking for a way to make projects go through our process as seamlessly and smoothly as possible. We don't want to provide roadblocks for development where there doesn't need to be. And so we're always trying to balance that and make that process work for the public, but work for the development community as well. I think I mentioned in my briefing report, or at least in those comment notes, an intangible benefit to that might be you're lowering the cost of development. I think I spoke to that more on the site plan review side. If you can figure out what you're trying to build and design that project quickly without a lot of time and cost involving designers and going back to the drawing board, if you will, over and over, you've saved money. And that money might be in the form of a lower cost for that affordable housing, or being able to charge a little less rent for those commercial entities. So there's some intangible benefits there.
That's a good point. So if it rises to the level where it needs a SEPA review, there's plenty of opportunity for public involvement. But if it's on a smaller scale, like you said, where you can scale it down and get it going faster and streamlined, then it's on to the hearings examiner and the staff to dictate it. So
without this PUD amendment that we're proposing, I think there'd be 4 more hearings on the Shelton Hills development. That just seems like maybe the other extreme. How many steps can you put a developer through where everything's always subject to a big change or denial,
yeah.
and at the same time offer some certainty that you can get through our process?
Okay.
Are we ready for a second reading on this ordinance? Could we please have a second reading on this ordinance?
Ordinance number 1848-0614, second reading. An ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, amending chapters 2.36 and 20.32 of the Shelton Municipal Code, and ordinances 1750-0709 and 1713-1207 relating to the powers of the hearings examiner and planned unit development.
Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 1848-0614?
I move that we approve ordinance number 1848-0614, chapter amending, an ordinance amending chapters 2.36 and 2.32 of the Shelton Municipal Code and planned unit development.
There's a second.
I would second that.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Noes? No. All right, next is another ordinance that's going to be a briefing presented to us by Mr. Steve Goins.
Thank you again, Mayor and Commissioners. I believe the second item on the agenda is the wireless communication facilities amendments. This particular amendment hasn't been very controversial. We've, with all of these proposed amendments, we've submitted these to the state for a 60-day review. They have been through review with our city attorney, and in this particular case, there was a very clear focus. We were trying to make sure that there wasn't any discrimination language among potential providers, that the document was consistent with the State Environmental Policy Act and different codes for the state of Washington, the FCC's 2009 declaratory ruling, recent Supreme Court decisions, and finally the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012. There doesn't seem to be a lot of concern that we've met that objective. Our legal folks are very supportive of the draft before you, and there has been no public comment to date.
Any questions or comments?
No, once again, thank you for the very clear changes.
All right, Leslie Ann, could we please have a second reading on this ordinance?
Ordinance number 1850-0614, second reading. An ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, amending Chapter 20.66 of the Shelton Municipal Code and Ordinance 1483-1197 relating to wireless communications facilities.
Is there a motion to approve this ordinance?
I move we approve ordinance number 1850-0614, amending Shelton Municipal Code 20.66, wireless communication facilities.
I second that.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance passes. Next item of business that we have before us is another briefing by Mr. Steve Goins.
Thank you again, Mayor and Commissioners. This is the proposed amendments to the site plan review procedures. I thought there might be some value in kind of stepping back and describing what site plan review is and why, in some other maybe facets of why we propose these changes. Jason and I were reviewing the code and trying to evaluate how this process that's described now meshes up with our practices and how we could improve on that. And it became clear to us that I think we had both made some false assumptions about what a site plan review really is intended to do, and we tried to really clarify that in this intent language. That this is not really a permit or any kind of approval at all. It's more of a signal to proceed, and that's kind of a way to look at this. Someone proposes a project that is large enough to require site plan review. We ask them to submit enough information so that we can evaluate whether the project's going to meet all these different criteria related to land use, parking, landscaping, design review. We perform the SEPA process, which I like with the PUD, is a separate action. And then we try to convey to the developer if there's changes to their application, what those need to be. We include a lot of different departments to get all of those comments we can to them in one time. The benefit is we believe we provide somebody with some valuable information that will help them complete the design of their project. Their project needs to meet these different criteria, but the real The real permit is in getting their building permit, getting their civil review completed and processed through the Public Works Department, and getting a permit to proceed. Without that, all you have is some sort of agreement that this project looks okay, but you're not authorized to do any further activities. We believe that, again, like with the PUD process, there's a lot of value in giving someone clear direction early, minimizing their cost and design, and trying to make that process as smooth and efficient as possible. I think, again, Commissioner Olson asked about how this interrelates to some of the historic districts. Those provisions are in place, and this isn't intended to override any of those. In fact, if you really look at this, the major change seemed to be, when you kind of look at it in total, is the removal of the revocation process. There was this onerous process if a project was deviating from the site plan that was approved, that we went through a public hearing and a very formal process to take that site plan approval away. And that's, I guess, when we started thinking about what this process is doing, that the site plan approval isn't a permit at all. The site plan approval has to align with the underlying land uses. You can't perform a land use that the zoning doesn't allow because you have site plan approval. You can't build something that's not per your building permit because you have site plan approval. All of those elements that really underscore what you're doing in the field, what you're doing in terms of a built project down the line in the future, are in our codes now. The site plan review simply helps someone get those first steps underway correctly and move forward in the right direction. And I hope that process was conveyed in those notes as well. I brought along a flyer that describes the SEPA process. I was going to spend a little time talking about that. This reads like these charts where you go here, yes, go here, no, and it keeps moving you around. This describes that SEPA process that, again, doesn't change through any of the site plan review. And all of these different steps on a typical project must be met in 120 days. One of the reasons I thought this was important to mention is there's a lot of language in here about the timing of getting an application processed. And we made one change that described when that occurred. And this was the reason why. Let me try to find it here. It's in the, yeah, I thought it was here.
Just tell us what your imagination is speaking to you.
I'm just realizing the language I wanted to include is stricken in this version I'm reading. I'm just getting confused.
I mean, you know, we're not going to nail you later on about that sentence.
In 204950 B, at least this is the version with all the comments, there's language in there about within 2 weeks of a determination under SEPA by the responsible SEPA official regarding the proposed project. Submission of, and it goes on to talk about the process. The reason that was important is we've tried to take seriously that charge to get a decision process going within 2 weeks of a submittal of an application. And what we've decided is we can't commit to that, in part because we don't know what the SEPA process might hold. The SEPA process really drives that timing, so we changed that language so that it says, once that SEPA determination is made, yeah, we can hold to the rest of that timing, get you through the site review process, get you a determination within 10 or 15 days after that. But we really can't commence that till we know you've got a complete SEPA application and we can make a determination. And again, that holds any project, large or small, to those same statutes that we've adopted, and they're really codified by the state. We really don't deviate from those. In terms of other changes, they're pretty minor. That revocation of that site plan review And I think the other somewhat significant change was the appeals process went to Dave O'Leary, our city administrator. Again, we felt it was more appropriate to have that appeal process heard by the hearing examiner. And that process, or that change, was proposed in this language before you today as well.
Was that was that a state law? And we weren't following that?
That wasn't a law at all, but during the WCIA audit, there was some recommendations that we should consider, and some of the recommendations include looking at your appeals process, and being consistent in your appeals process was one of those. Typically, administrative decisions are, particularly for land use decisions, are appealed to your hearing examiner. That's very common. And for us to have a different process, which really isn't spelled out anywhere else, there's nowhere in the code where it talks about an appeal to the city administrator and how that works. It just says that's what you do, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. The process to a hearing examiner is very clear.
Yeah, I think that, I think in streamlining that process should be, we've had lots of complaints about how tough it is to do this stuff, and, the staff spends an enormous amount of time walking people through it, that this should alleviate some of that.
We've had good luck with this in general, but you can always improve on that. And one of the items I think I commented on in the bullets on the little comments on the side is there was a statement that says you shall have this hearing with the applicant and all these other departments present to present the project. And we've done this informally a number of times, and sometimes the applicant just says, look, I don't really need to have a meeting. I'm perfectly happy with the conditions you've given me. Can you just forego this hearing and give me my permit? And so we gave ourselves that option. If they're perfectly happy with the conditions that we've written in, we'll just write them up and let them go. And that saves a little time for everybody, keeps the other department heads from having to show up to a meeting that the applicant doesn't want anyway. And it's not a public hearing, it's just an opportunity for them to have a discourse with staff before a decision's made.
All right, are you ready for us to have a public input on this then?
You bet.
Okay, so anybody want to speak to this issue? All right, we have to invite you at this point, and so next I invite my fellow commissioners if there's any further comments about this ordinance.
Just another comment on one of your bubbles here where you refer to the deleted language also conflicted with the state law under which building permits vest when a complete application is filed, not
Right.
when the permit is issued. So in the past, the clock started when the permit was issued, and we were in conflict. Am I reading that right? That's same page as 49070.
Right, the language was a little unclear. What it said in the current version is if either the permit or approval is not utilized or construction work is not begun within a certain said time, then your application becomes void. That doesn't really speak to vesting or an expiration, and when you've utilized a site plan review is not clear either. What's more clear is you've utilized it when you've submitted a building application that's deemed complete that conforms with your site plan. That's very clear, and that's again consistent with state code.
Okay.
All right, any other questions or comments?
No, I think that the language that is in there as far as the purpose of the site plan review, especially the last couple lines, is very clear. Just, it is a tool to provide coordination and collaboration between the city and project proponents early in the design process, before the developer, landowner, or project designers are committed to or significantly invested in a specific design. I think that's great, and I think that this will serve that purpose very well.
All right,
Just one more final thing. I just want to, again, comment on the bubbles. Was this
Man.
something you waited for with the public input, or is this, I think these are great.
We like
I
the
mean,
bubbles.
You
Yeah.
like those? Well,
Is this going to be a new,
I might have to use these moving forward, especially when you have this many proposed changes.
yeah.
I'll
was-
take note of that.
It was really excellent.
I kind of think
Appreciate
you'll have
that.
to use them.
Well,
Be called the bubble guy.
I probably could compliment you on the bubbles, but I think we probably got enough of them, so. All right, if we are ready to move on, then could we please have a reading of this ordinance?
Ordinance number 1851-0614, second reading. An ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, amending Chapter 20.49 of the Shelton Municipal Code, and Ordinance 1311-191 relating to site plan review procedures.
Is there a motion to approve this ordinance?
Am I in the right place? I move that we approve ordinance 1851-0614, amending Shelton Municipal Code 20.49, site plan review procedures.
Is there a second?
Second that?
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance passes, second reading. All right, now we are done with old business and we're moving on to new business, and this will be about our Upper Mountain View Pressure Zone Tank Site easement, and that will be presented to us by our Public Works Director, Mr. Greg Clark.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. This is an integral part of the Upper Mountain View Pressure Zone project that we discussed in detail with all the different funding options. This particular easement is for the location of the two tanks that will eventually end up on that site. Whether they're both built at this time, we're not sure. We got to look at the bids when they come in, but we certainly are securing the real estate to provide for those two side-by-side tanks. This is at the Mason County Public Works Facility, which I believe you're familiar with. We are just acquiring the location for the tanks and an easement for the water service line that will go up and connect into the tanks off of the road. And anyway, we had a certified appraisal done on this particular location so that we were all clear on what its value was. It came in at $90,000. At the location where the actual tanks will be located, the appraisal indicated the value of that was similar to the cost per square foot for a sale if you were going to just physically buy that real estate, because you pretty much lost all ability to use that property. So the county will be compensated in the amount of the square footage cost for if we're just going to acquire that property outright. But the rest of the easement was valued based on the fact that, you know, there's going to be a pipe in the ground there, but you could use the property as you could see fit. And the county reviewed this. It went before the Mason County Commissioners on June 10th, and they discussed it and approved it. And of course, this is all leading up to the city's effort to provide the Washington State Patrol with water pressure along with the other parcels out in that vicinity as soon as we can. And so it's kind of a critical path here to get this easement acquired, because the Department of Health will not allow us to move forward on the bidding process until we physically have the property acquired where these tanks will be located. So all that said is we need to hopefully move forward with this, acquiring the easement. The way it's set up for signature is I would actually sign the easement for the city, and then the finance department would need to cut a voucher for $90,000 to pay for that easement, made out to the Mason County Treasurer. And so with that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Any further questions or comments?
Just glad we're moving along. We
Yeah.
made the effort to do it. Let's get going. Good move.
All right. So I believe that we have the information enough and concur that we place this on our consent agenda for June 30th, 2014. Next is administration report. Mr. Dave O'Leary.
Yeah, my activities this past week were the same as you three. I was at the AWC conference, participated in our conference sessions and then attended a few others in addition to that. Most of them were related. One was related to public involvement, for instance, and another one was related to, of all things, sewer rate setting, utility rate setting. And which actually, there was a kind of an overview, and I actually picked up some things that I didn't know before, which was interesting. So that's what I've been doing. Right now I'm getting caught back up after being out most of last week.
Very good. This is another opportunity, general public comment. If anybody would like to say something to us, this is the opportunity. And so, administration final touches.
You have any touches? Nope. Purple sheet, Your Honor.
All right, and I would like to say one thing. I'll do a final touch, I guess. That it was really exciting to be over at this conference this last week with Commissioner Moore and Commissioner Olson, and and our city administrator, Dave O'Leary, and that it's extremely beneficial to get out with other cities that are doing the same things we're doing and looking for other nuggets of truth on how we can do our jobs better. And so this was well served to the city that we get out once a year and get to this conference. And so I know I really appreciated everything I got from it, and it definitely makes my job a lot easier to know what's happening out there, because sometimes if we just do this amongst ourselves, sometimes you can read about this stuff, but it's better to be there right with everybody else and understand that we're not alone in this job. So anyway, that's my last 2 cents on that. Our next meeting will be June 30th, 2014 at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. This meeting is adjourned.